About 20 million people practice yoga in America. For most of these people, yoga means asana, the physical postures. I don't think more than 20% of the yoga practitioners incorporate other aspects of yoga into their practice and lifestyle, namely morals, disciplines, breathwork, and meditation. It is nice to know that so many people have an asana practice. Yoga asanas do offer many health benefits. However, if these people expand their practice even marginally by embracing other limbs of yoga, they would benefit exponentially in all walks of life. An integrated yoga practice builds character, discipline, an appreciation for the ecosystem in which we live, and the resolve to face challenges more gracefully. There is no better time than now for us to embrace yoga in its entirety. Most of the problems we face in this country today are the result of a lack of discipline, morals, and holistic view of life. We spend more than we earn, we suffer from illnesses due to poor diet and lifestyle choices, we spend money on wars instead of investing that money in the people who build our society, namely teachers, healthcare and social workers, and many other civil servants. We are destroying the environment for short-term benefits. This list can go on and on. The point I'm trying to make is that the foundation of our country is crumbling, and it is time for a fundamental change in the way we think and live. If one sincerely embraces an integrated yoga practice, they can easily avoid the problems mentioned a few moments ago. We need to focus less on working out and focus more on working in. Real yoga is practiced outside a yoga studio or a gym. In fact, one can transform their life just by practicing the yamas, the morals, and niyamas, the disciplines of yoga. I think yoga has been relegated to mostly physical practices due to a lack of proper understanding of yoga and lack of comprehensive yoga education. I see many delusions or mayas of yoga in America. I spoke to 12 senior yoga teachers about my observations. I sincerely hope that the conversations presented in this documentary will clear some of the misconceptions of yoga in America. This documentary will address 4 different subject areas which will be presented as mayas or delusions as we delve further into the movie. Today, yoga is synonymous with a set of physical routines, and we all know that yoga is much more than physical practices. Through proper education, this misconception needs to be clarified. The second thing is, a lot of the yoga teachers themselves do not have the education or experience to teach all aspects of yoga. The current training system focuses more on just physical practices, and there is a notion that with 200 hours of education, one can go out and start teaching yoga. But 200 hours are not enough sometimes even to learn about all the physical practices, and one definitely needs a lot more time to understand the spiritual component of yoga and the philosophical components of yoga. So we will discuss a little bit about the education system and standards. Thirdly, there seems to be a lot of confusion that yoga is a religion. Because yoga comes from India, there is a perception that yoga is Hinduism. And because of this confusion, a lot of people are very hesitant to embrace yoga in its entirety. They might feel afraid that they have to let go of their religion. And this has also led to a lot of controversies and unnecessary regulations by government on yoga. So I think that's an important subject to address. Finally, we would like to address the, the aspect about transparency in teaching yoga. I've noticed that many yoga teachers are teaching techniques from other lineages and spiritual faiths, but they call it yoga. And I feel that it's important to be very clear as to what yoga is, and if one is modifying yoga to incorporate some other techniques, we should make it clear to the students what it is that they are getting from their teachers. If we don't make this clear, we might be misleading them on their spiritual journey. So I hope this documentary is a stepping stone towards creating more clarity about yoga in America, and I hope it encourages people to embrace all other aspects of yoga and not just the physical part of it. A quick overview of yoga seems appropriate for a documentary of this nature. The Vedas, from which the yoga philosophies were derived, mention 4 different paths of yoga: Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raja Yoga, also known as Ashtanga Yoga. All these paths ultimately take us to the same destination, that is Samadhi or Moksha. The final goal manifests in the dissolution of ego in us, thereby dissolving the duality between us and another being or another God outside us. Different people embrace different paths based on their spiritual proclivities. I feel that one can rarely be on just one path. We are constantly engaging in activities that were prescribed by all these 4 paths. Bhakti Yoga is the path of surrender and devotion to a spiritual figurehead with whom one feels a deep connection. The premise here is that if you constantly think about a divine being and their divine qualities, if all your efforts are dedicated to that divine being, your thoughts will eventually become divine, and those thoughts will eventually result in divine actions. Karma Yoga is the path of selfless service. The more we serve others without regards to the outcome of whom we serve, there will come a point when we don't see any distinction between us and another human being. This is when the ego in us starts dying. Jnana Yoga is the path of reasoning and objective analytical thinking. It is the science of the mind. By understanding the true nature of ourselves and acting upon our realizations, we are able to transcend our foibles and dualities in life. Raja Yoga is an integrated path that combines physical practices such as asana and pranayama, various stages of meditation, built on a strong foundation of morals and disciplines. In my view, this path includes various aspects of the first 3, that is Bhakti, Karma, Jnana. Given its integrated approach, it is no wonder that Raja Yoga is the foundation of modern yoga practice. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are the building blocks for all modern practice. Many brands of yoga have emerged from Raja Yoga over the years. Hatha Yoga, the most commonly practiced yoga path these days, is a subset of Raja Yoga. This practice does not incorporate the yamas and niyamas, namely the morals and disciplines. For the purpose of this documentary, we will be referring to the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga. So today I wanted to understand from your perspective why should somebody expand their practice beyond asana? What are their benefits?
Well, I mean, first I would say that I think we all kind of come into this world with our own level of understanding. And so I think asana really is going to have its own meaning and its own place for each person and where it can lead you, because obviously we're attached to our physical body. We're attached to that first Annamaya Kosha. That's kind of where we all start, right? And if we can start to use asana to move beyond the physical body and to realize that there's actually something more there, that we're more than just what we see, feel, and touch, then I think it leads us into a place where we want to discover a little bit more about this journey that is the yogic path.
Is there something that came before the asana practice that we missed that we may want to relook at once we started our asana practice? Because that's our pathway in, that's what attracts us first in America, is the physical aspect of it. But once we're in there, we've gone in, we've experienced it at whatever level, whether it's in a yoga class or in a gym or in an ashram or wherever, we have time to pause before we think about what's next as to what was there. There was something before this. I skipped something.
I think people go into meditation spontaneously in that 5 or 10 minutes on the yoga mat. Maybe they do a little bit of chanting at the beginning of class, maybe a little bit of chanting at the end. And during their asana, they'll have a few seconds here and there of meditation. And that few minutes of meditation, people get attuned to their own life force.
Most people move beyond asana when they need it in their lives, and whether that's just the normal maturing process. But I find that many, especially of the younger ones who love the physicality of asana, I find that they come to meditation, pranayama, let's call it the quieter practices, the more inward practices. They come when there's a problem, a tragedy in their lives.
Sometimes people go, well, why should I even do yoga? Why should I meditate? And honestly, there is a psychic evolution that's happening on the planet at this moment. I really believe it. And I believe that in the next 20, 25 years, things are going to be really different. A lot of people are starting to really open to a sensitivity that wasn't here before. They're understanding the universal laws of all humans. We're here together as a team. We're helping one another. It's becoming more and more predominant. And I believe that that's going to grow.
How can it be that you live in a way that doesn't acknowledge who you really are? Now, you might find that through asana. Cool. You might find it through meditation. You might find it through the deeper studies like Jnana Yoga. It's more about the intellectual aspect. Bhakti Yoga, through devotion of the heart, right? I think you and I are mostly talking about Raja Yoga, the 8-limb path, right? So there's a very specific recipe for wholeness, for self-knowledge, for integrating the aspects of ourselves so that we have ease and steadiness and a different kind of freedom, so that we're ready for anything that comes, right? So that we can live in ease with anything that comes, aligned, steady, present, open. You talked to me earlier about freedom, really free in a fundamental way, moksha.
I think that we have to have access to some of those other limbs of yoga that actually allow us to have that true experience of what the full promise of yoga can be. And so it's, first of all, knowing that there is another promise of yoga other than having, long hamstrings or a tight butt or a quote-unquote yoga body, whatever that is supposed to be. And, marketing has a lot to do with what we think the yoga body is.
So the yamas and niyamas are really essential, and rather than rules, I like to think of them in and of themselves as a practice. So the practice of ahimsa, the practice of satya. Satya is one I've been thinking about a lot lately, so let's maybe use that one. So satya means truth. And I think oftentimes when you say, are you being honest, when I say, are you being honest with yourself in this practice? So say it's asana. Is it appropriate for you? Is it honest in terms of who you are in this moment in time to try to be sticking your legs behind your head? are your hips, honestly, ready for that? So I think it's a really easy entry to look at all of the yamas and niyamas, even on the yoga mat in terms of asana.
That they may, in fact, the yamas and niyamas apply not so much to daunting aspects of the yoga world, but more about a caution that we have the potentiality for instinctual behavior. And the yamas are there to teach us that this instinctual behavior can be curbed. So even one tiny step is yoga. It's a tiny step in winning the battle with the mind as to who's in charge. And then the niyamas themselves have their own practical application. We have instincts towards certain things that are good within us. You know, I mean, the yamas obviously are about, can we control our violent nature? Can we control our ability to deceive, manipulate, and lie? Can we control our desire to take? Can we control our desire for lust? Let's be honest, you know, lust is an important part of our personalities. At some level or the other, we may call it love, but... And then, can we control our desire to own everything?
Yeah, I go to my asana class, I feel great. Of course you do. But if there's a gradual mixture, say in a class of pranayama, mantra, and kirtan, philosophy, dharma, as it's described, discussion of the energy experience that's happening. You know, what is going on with the nadis and the energy in the body, and what is the Sushumna, and what is the Ida and Pingala? And, oh, you mean if I align my Ida and Pingala, that's the same thing as aligning my nervous system? And oh, wow, right? Deeper understanding. So that's one way to think of it. In the class, how to use all the tools to define the experience gradually so that deeper awareness and understanding comes from the student. Oh, it's not just my body. I mean, yoga would say this, right? You're not just your body anyway. And let's be honest, physicists would say this too. Physicists are very clear. I mean, this is an energy field. Don't get confused about this. I say all the time in my class, not the pose, the practice.
When I first started practicing yoga, I was doing a Kundalini yoga practice, which was a lot of energy, but it was never really explained to me what we were doing and why we were doing it. And then I kind of migrated over to Hatha yoga and more of a power yoga practice. And I became very kind of focused on the physical look of what the asana was supposed to look like. I was very focused on being able to achieve all the arm balances and the handstands and making sure that I was, you know, the strongest in the class or had the best practice in the class. And then I went on a yoga retreat and I took a copy of the Yoga Sutras. I went to the Bodhi tree and I thought, oh, I should bring some kind of a yoga book with me. I had no idea anything about what I was doing. I just happened to pick up a copy of the Yoga Sutras. And I spent 3 days and I could not put the Yoga Sutras down. I probably understood 1/1,000,000th of what I was reading. But what I did realize is that the yoga that I was practicing was not going to lead me to this place that the Yoga Sutras was talking about. And that I needed to find a teacher that was going to lead me to that place.
Yoga of the breath, known as pranayama. There are many techniques of pranayama. And because we have many techniques, we can use them for different people, for different needs. Then, I think most essential is the next one, the yoga of the mind. Here, when we are ready, we can use this mind, the different jumping mind, in such a way that the mind, instead of dwelling on 100 things, will stay with one thing for a length of time, like this mountain. No, it's really amazing to see a mountain like this. Think of the mountain and receive some inspiration from that mountain. This is what yoga of mind does. When I link my mind with something profound, that gives me something. Somehow I receive something from that. And that changes me. That changes my personality.
Can you share with us about your personal experiences or what you have seen in your students when they took their practice to the next step? Any inner, outer manifestations in their personalities?
Yeah, absolutely. The most that what I see is clarity and a sense of awareness that comes about where people actually begin to see how their own mind works and how their own mind and their thoughts are limiting their own lives. That's, to me, is the biggest kind of result of being able to slow things down a little bit, to focus more on the breath, and to really allow yourself to come into a place where you can truly practice pranayama and practice meditation, that they actually get to see almost as though they're watching themselves in a movie, that they become the observer, they become the witness to why maybe they're repeating the same patterns over and over in their life. And then they get to start to have ways where they see themselves acting a certain way or beginning to think a certain way. And there's actually a pause where they can start to unwind that kind of action. And that starts to shift their lives in big, big ways.
That part of ourselves that really isn't honest, that thinks I should have this right now, whether that's an asana, whether that's a circumstance in life, a relationship, a certain type of relationship. And I think you can learn those things on the mat, in asana. You can learn to look at yourself and not be violent with yourself, and be fully honest with yourself, and learn about santosha, contentment with what is.
Can we actually perpetuate and increase our desire for purity? That exists too. Can we increase our desire to do good, to make the effort, to express the endeavors within our hearts, our goals, our visions? Can we study what it is that we want to? These, can we surrender? Because that's a huge part of this.
A lot of people think yoga is a religion, and they're afraid to practice yoga. They think that if they practice yoga, they have to relinquish their religion and maybe embrace a new one. But I would like to make it clear that yoga is not a religion. It existed even before religions like Hinduism were beginning to be codified as a way of life or a faith in India. If yoga ever talks about a religion or a god for that matter, it's really the God in you. Yoga is like open source religion. Anybody can practice yoga. At the same time, they can use it to strengthen their own belief system, whatever that may be. If you see the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, only at one point they make a mention of something that is close to God. That is called Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara means God or a universal source or a creator. And Pranidhana means surrender. So surrender to the divine essence is an important concept in a yoga practice. Yoga will only make you a little more stronger in your belief system. There is no need to be afraid that you have to start believing in a new god or a religion if you practice yoga.
It is not correct to say that yoga is a Hindu practice. It is not correct to say that it is a Buddhist practice or Christian practice. So, why this type of conditioning? The purpose of yoga is to transcend all barriers. not only the barrier of mind and limitation of the body, not only the barrier of sanskara, karma, but also the barrier of destiny and fate, the barrier of belief system, the barrier of cultural taboos, ethos, mores. Finally, to transcend this feeling of separateness.
It's not my view. It is scholarship, that yoga is not religion. Emphatically not. Yoga is one of the 6 ancient darshanas, philosophical systems. The word darshana means philosophy, ancient philosophy. And it was a separate philosophy from the philosophies that became world religion. Even way back, prior to Buddha, prior to Christ, there were these philosophical systems. And yoga was separate from those other darshanas. However, yoga has been universally useful to all those systems. This is why yoga went through the ancient world and went over, hundreds of generations, and we still have it today. Because it was applicable to the situation, to the language group. So many different, 400 different languages in ancient India, and many, many religions, not just Hinduism. And yet yoga was useful to all of them.
I don't feel like yoga is a religion. I'm a Sikh, and I don't even actually feel like being a Sikh is a religion. There are different pathways to open people's consciousness to God consciousness. From the wise ones, knowing how to open up the energy through the body so a man or woman can live in a God-conscious, aware, radiant state. And that wasn't any religion. That was just the wise ones putting forth different tools so that people could just not live in pain, not live in the lower centers, not live reactionary, not be against each other, but be with each other and for each other.
What is religion? To me, religion means bondage. That's just probably imprints from my own upbringing. But the spiritual path is about freedom, and religion is about fundamentalism. To me, and so I think that the path of yoga is about liberation, and I'm not talking about like enlightenment. I don't even mean that. I mean just liberation from all the stuff that binds us. For me, the life journey is a journey of the heart, and it's a journey of discovering love and finding love and awakening love. Being honest, being kind. So what's religion? The practices, most of the practices that I do in my daily life come from the Vedic tradition, from the Indian tradition, which now people call Hinduism. But I could never say I was a Hindu. I'm just a human being who longs for spirit, longs for God, and I've met these beautiful, beautiful human beings who have guided me in some of these practices that have lit up my heart.
Like say here we are seeing the 2 very renowned masters' pictures. One is Swami Vivekananda sitting there. What he said, गर्व से कहो हम हिंदू है. With pride he say I am Hindu. But he never carried any insignia of Hindu religion. Neither he was carrying a statue, nor he was doing any arati anywhere, nor he was having any repulsion. Oh, you are a woman, I cannot be with you. You are a drunkard, I cannot be with you. Because he came to the West and he showed what a true spirituality is. So we find in Swamiji's life no cultural conditioning.
I began yoga when I was a teenager. And the first class we ever took was from the Sikh yoga, the 3HO people, in the basement of Strong Chapel at the University of Rochester. So here we have what was essentially built as a Protestant chapel. And we have this very defined religious group from India put together. And yet when you're in the yoga class, and it's about breathing and movement, and some chanting, but without a real theological context, you come out, if anything, you come out sort of confused. And as one of my great teachers said, Professor Antonio de Nicolas, he said, confusion is the beginning of knowledge. Then as I followed through, and I discovered so many religious usages of yoga, I began to see that there was no requirement. And in fact, the next year, I took a class at the University of Buffalo with members of ISKCON. And I was sort of puzzled because the Bhagavad Gita was our text. We were studying this, chanting it in Sanskrit. And they have a very particular way of interpreting the Bhagavad Gita. And I questioned. And they said, Hari Om, because they saw that I was not interested in following their theology, but I was very, very deeply interested in the practices of yoga.
But the modern day masters, they cling to their conditioning. They say, I can't go and eat in a restaurant because I'm a master, I'm a Jew, I'm a Hindu. I cannot go to eat in a restaurant that is prepared by Mohammedans or Christians. I am none. I am not God. I am an ordinary person. I am an extraordinary person. I am a Swamiji, I am a Guru, I am a master, I have 1,000 followers. These are all conditionings. A true spiritual person is he who has transcended all this.
In my book, The Promise of Love, Sex and Intimacy, I have people of all faiths, including two wonderful Christian ministers who speak clearly about this subject, where they took up a yoga practice and they found it really helped them to go deeper in their Christian liturgy and their Christian life, their Christian faith, you know. To truly love thy neighbor as thyself, you know, the great Jewish yogi, you know, Jesus, that became Christianity and the fundamental tenet of the Christian life is to love thy neighbor as thyself. See, well, love thyself. Inhale, exhale. Love this life. Embrace this life. Then there's a chance that I can love you, embrace you. But if I'm not sensitive to my own life, it's very difficult. I simply cannot be sensitive to another.
Religion creates this belief in the mind and fear in the heart of some external authority who is watching all your actions. And why he is watching? He is watching only for the purpose of punishing you. So the fear is inbuilt in religion. But in yoga, the past thing that is to be demolished, that yoga demolishes, is fear.
Actually, my grandmother was a Pentecostal preacher.
Oh.
So.
So it's a Christian sect?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So having grown up in the Christian world, when you first started doing yoga, what was your experience? Did you ever feel it has a religious connotation?
No, actually, I actually felt that the energy, I actually saw a lot of the similarities. I saw similarities because my grandmother was, the church that she was a preacher for was a Fire Baptist church. And there's a lot of references to fire and the specific type of tantric yoga that I practice. And so I saw that this idea of Shakti and fire and Agni was all very similar. At the same time, I had a lot of energetic experiences when I first started practicing yoga. And I realized that those energetic experiences were very similar to some of the experiences that I had had when I was younger of getting saved in the church. And that realizing that my grandmother was basically giving Shaktipat. You know, I remember her telling me a long time ago that, because in this religion you were not allowed to sing anything other than, the Lord's prayers or, Jesus' name. And she would say to me, oh, you're singing Michael Jackson. You shouldn't be singing that. The only thing worth singing is about God. And the first time that I did kirtan, I said she would be happy to see me doing this because I'm singing the names of God. For me, I don't see any difference between that type of worship and being able to connect to the divine.
I want to find ways to invite people into yoga without again being afraid of losing their religion.
Yeah, right.
So if they do kirtan in other languages, it might be a portal.
Yeah, in theory, I totally agree. I have a couple of Hebrew songs on some of my albums, and I have some English songs with repetition on some of my albums. For me, I even some Buddhist chants, but just very little bits. I just have to say that for me, the names of the Hindu gods and goddesses, they just resonate so strongly for me. I mean, we know, human beings know that singing, period, singing, is so freeing of the heart. It's so freeing of the emotions. It's like really one of the best things that a person can do. And most of us, for some cultural reason, have it beaten out of us when we're young. India is one of the coolest places because everyone sings there. Brazil also, everyone sings.
To be a yogi means to transcend all identity to have. A Hindu teacher should be very comfortable in a church, in a masjid, as he is comfortable in a temple. That's the true spirituality. Our society needs this type of enlightened beings. That is the big problem I am seeing everywhere.
God has made each of us as completely unique individuals. And as such, we all have individual relationships with God. And one person will find that asana and going to church on Sunday will awaken their heart and enliven their relationship with God. Another person will find that doing japa, ram, and drinking a lot of coffee is what they need to, that's sort of me, to feel that relationship, that personal relationship. I mean, that's what Bhakti Yoga is about. It's the personal relationship. And since each person is so completely unique, how could we fit into a box of religion, the best that we can offer anyone else the world at large, is the truest, deepest, most authentic inner connection that we have. And to express that in the most honest, real way that we can.
200 hours are not enough to learn even just the asanas, the physical poses. So how then can we expect somebody to learn about the other 7 limbs of yoga and then teach them? I'll ask you a few questions, and maybe the answers to those questions will tell you why I'm passionate about this subject. If you're a parent, would you ever send your child to a school where the teacher had only 200 hours of education? Or let's say you needed some therapy. Would you go to a therapist who has had only 200 hours of education? Or let's say you want to learn how to play the guitar. Would you go to somebody who has had only 200 hours of education? I'm absolutely sure your answer to all my questions will be a resounding no. In addition to wanting them to have more education, you will probably expect that person to be more experienced. So with that in mind, I would like to ask America, why do we have such low expectations of yoga teachers? Why has such a vast science of self-realization been trivialized to only 200 hours of education? Yoga is a spiritual science. Teaching yoga is a bigger responsibility because you're having a bigger impact on the world when you teach yoga. So it's even more important to learn it right, live it right, and teach it right.
Okay. 200 hours is just to dip the toe in the pond.
And then some people say, well, being a teacher is not about how you can do it, or being a gymnast, or being a yoga model. It's, can you actually explain it to somebody else, right? Can you impart something?
I don't know that we can ever say, what would that gateway look like? You're ready, you're not ready.
The good part about educating so many yoga teachers is that you're promoting the mushrooming effect of passing on a kind of ways to make the world a better place. People teaching, people caring about someone else's alignment, people helping other people with alignment. It's a positive momentum. Is 200 hours enough? Absolutely not.
In terms of yoga, there is a sense that there's almost a democratic sense about it. Like, this is something that belongs to everyone. How dare we place standards upon it at all? How dare we place limitations upon it at all? And I think there is a sort of idealistic desire to have easy barrier to lower the barriers to entry.
Well, this is where the beauty of institutions comes into play. And I know it's very popular, particularly for yoga people and even historically, to be anti-establishment. But an establishment or an institution can be a wonderful guide.
Really good news that helps me feel not scared is that what I do know is that we find the right students will find the right teacher. And so the people who have been practicing, say, 3 years, and then they do a 200-hour training, are they teaching yoga like you and I would want? Absolutely not. Can they teach a physical practice that's hopefully safe? If I train them, they can. And that will be what they're teaching. And the people who come to them will be people who want to stretch their hips and breathe a little more deeply or get a good sweat. Do you see what I mean? I think that people find the right teacher and will seek the depth of yoga that they want and that they're ready for, whether they're conscious of that or not.
Yoga is something that transcends time and place. Yoga has existed right? In more than just this time and place. And yoga is not corrupted by time and place. Yoga is yoga. But how are we actually applying it to the time and the place now while being true to its intention? So it's almost like the yoga teacher sits in, or the really skilled yoga teacher, when we talk about a yoga teacher versus an asana teacher, when we talk about, whatever levels we're talking about, when we're talking about a yoga teacher who embodies something and has a very deep, deep skill, it is that ability to sort of live in a state of paradox of here's a teaching that comes from a different time and place, and yet also comes from this time and place. And how do we have a relationship with that in ourselves and in our student and in the teaching?
It's very interesting with 200-hour training, because I think that it's really a great entry point. That in the 200-hour training, people learn about nonviolence and truthfulness and self-control. They learn about contentment, and they learn about self-reflection. They learn at least that those things exist, and whether they're practicing them daily or not, that's yet to be seen. But they also do learn the foundations of breathing and movement. And I think that that's a very, very important place to begin.
For people who want to make an effort to teach their students more than asana, embracing all these aspects in their yoga practice, what kind of obstacles do you foresee? Because if it has not happened, that means something must have stopped the teachers or studios from giving yoga as an integral practice. From your experience as a teacher, what kind of obstacles might one face?
I think the obstacles are simply that Krishnamacharya's teaching is being left out of the popular styles. And so the obstacles to teaching pranayama and meditation is simply that the knowledge isn't there. And we've confined our yoga teaching to the teaching of postures and the shapes, the anatomy of the body. Fair enough, but even the hatha aspect, the breath in its polarities of strength that is receptive, has been left out of even that teaching. So we need to get it in, and then there'll be many more teachers familiar with pranayama and how meditation arises from asana pranayama as a seamless activity. So that's what we need. We need a little more education.
I remember when the Yoga Alliance, we were just having an early meeting, this is maybe 12 years ago, and talking about how to set the standards. And one of the things that I kept saying is, most teacher trainings, you don't have to have any experience to enter them. How do we decide who gets to start with a 200-hour training? If all of my trainees had been practicing for 10 years every day, asana, some pranayama, and even a short meditation, then I might get somewhere with 200 hours. They might really be ready. But sometimes I have that person, and then right beside them, I have someone who's been practicing for 2 months, and somehow they snuck in. Or I have someone who's been practicing for 10 years once a week. Right, so how do we, if we can start with a level playing ground that was a high level, when they start the training, we might get somewhere with 200 hours, but that is completely unpredictable. And I do feel that unless you've had a certain amount of experience as a practitioner, you cannot offer to your students to explore and consider and to sit and see for themselves what their own truth is. Rather, like a science, we say, this is the way. And yet I think true yoga, a good teacher will say, here is a way. Try this. And if it feels like you've come into an obstacle, pause. And let's see if we can find another path for you. Right? I don't think one can do that with 200 hours of experience. We cling to the one thing that we know and understand. And I think that is very limiting. I don't know how to control that.
one of the great gifts that I learned in teacher's training is how to look and how to listen and how to observe what that person needs. And yet there's so much I don't know. The yoga teachers who are physical therapists, they'll be able to, focus on specific ligaments and tendons in ways that I can't. A lot of what we teach is just passed on through folklore. We heard it in a class and that makes it so. I don't know. I mean, who's really checking?
Capitalism tends to be, I don't know those economic words, but I think what's rewarded is numbers of attendees rather than depth. And so I think that most studios think, oh, it's only, I don't know how much it is, $3,000 for 200. There are a lot of people who will come. And now if I go to 500 hours, and that's, let's just say, $10,000 commitment, there's going to be less people who will commit.
The danger is that there's a sense of complacency. Oh, I have done that. I have my paper to put on the wall. I have signed off. I have my card. And I have arrived. And that is sort of the danger of complacency. Rather than, what does that mean going forward? And I think there are some of those things that are nominally in place. Nominally, teachers are supposed to do continuing education. Nominally, there's the 500 hours. Nominally, there are things beyond that. There are now master's degree programs and so on. And I think the proliferation of those are extremely important. More mentorship or assisting or anything related to that is important.
I'll say this at the end of the training. Wow, I realize how much I don't know. I realize how much there is to learn. I know that I'm a beginner. And frankly, many, many years later, I feel like a beginner. In any field, what can you learn of anything that matters in 200 hours? It's just dipping. It's just a touch. You can't learn anything in 200 hours. We send people to graduate school, 6, 7, 8 years of study, and then they know a little something about whatever they're studying.
It's just a process of this grand affair of yoga education traveling from the ancient time into the modern world. This is what we need to do now, is give people an education.
I'm observing that a lot of American yoga teachers are teaching yoga from a tantric point of view, and I often wonder if that is confusing people even more about what yoga really is. Yoga and Tantra are two spiritual paths with very different approaches. And I see three main differences. One is yoga is the path of renunciation. It's all about withdrawing from external distractions and sensory stimuli and going inwards. Whereas Tantra, on the other hand, encourages to engage and involve and maybe even indulge in the things that yoga is asking us to renounce. Second thing is, yoga is very strongly based on morals, disciplines and morals. Yamas and niyamas are extremely important in the yogic practice. Tantra, on the other hand, does not emphasize on morals at all. So because of it being an individual practice, the question of what is good for others does not even arise. And thirdly, yoga is a little more prescriptive in nature. It's like a best practice that has been given to us by our ancestors who found it extremely useful on their spiritual journeys. And Tantra, on the other hand, is individual and experiential based practice. So once they learn these basic techniques, then it's all left to the individual about their own discipline and practice and what they learn from it and what they do with those learnings. So these are three fundamental differences I feel between yoga and tantra. To talk about it in a practical sense, these days yoga classes are full of what I call distractions. We have a lot of music, loud music playing. Then sometimes they incorporate dancing, martial arts, special light effects. You have even some kind of incenses and smells, all incorporated into a yoga class, probably with the intention of entertaining people. And in my view, these are all distractions. They are taking the person away from being there. And all these distractions go against the holy grail of yoga, which is to go inwards and cut off from other distractions.
They should know what Tantra is.
First of all, if you say you're teaching yoga, teach yoga.
No, but there is Tantric yoga. There's a whole history of Tantric yoga. Much of our yoga practice teachings are based on Tantra. We're not recreating the wheel. This has been happening for the whole period of Siddhas. That was Tantric. And Tantra was memorizing. Tantra was mantra. Tantra was alchemy of medicines, Siddha medicine. Tantra is very different from what we think it is. Tantra is not sexual indulgence.
Feeling good is palliative care, right? In some way. But doing the work is the cure. So I'm in this moral quandary. Are yoga teachers doing what they're doing because they want to help people heal and be better people? Or are yoga teachers teaching because they want somebody to just feel good and be entertained?
There's a parigraha, there's a greed, to have more people in class. And I think that that's a big trap. That when there's the financial aspect and when the school says, I'll pay you, $5 a student, then there's a kind of a parigraha that comes along with it. So that it's more about having more students than it is about, the quality of really connecting with what that person needs at that time.
Tantra teaches us about non-duality, that the mundane and the spiritual are the same, and that, as it is in the microcosm, as it is in the macrocosm. And so if we look at our body as being an altar and our life as the temple, then we can use these experiences of life as practices to expand ourselves and to accelerate our life in some way, because actually the tantric practices are accelerators. So I think it's just a matter of, are you using those tantric practices in a way that it is accelerating your life and leading you to that place of non-duality, or are you using it as, is it becoming an obstacle?
And I don't think Tantra is about indulgence. That is how it's being represented, and I'm not sure that that's completely accurate. See, Tantra itself comes from the root tanoti, to expand. Tanu is a form, to expand our form. And trayati, which is liberation. So, and tan also comes from tanu, which is form. It's also an expansion. It's also a way of measuring our form. How can we measure our form? And tra is three. So we're recognizing three forms: spiritual, subtle, physical.
I stopped going to classes 10 years ago because I felt that many of the teachers were performing. And that's great, and they're exquisite performers, but coming from 30 years of Hollywood, it's not what I needed. And when I listen to exquisite music in a room, my mind, I cannot practice Citta Vritti Nirodha. My mind goes to the lyrics, and I leave the present.
See, when I had my yoga studios, I would lead meditation classes. And there was this one girl who would come to meditate, and she would find it extremely hard to meditate without any music. but most other people in the class are okay. So just for her sake, I would play the music once in a while. And for 6-7 months I did it. And at one point when I stopped the music, she could not meditate again. And I had to tell her, in the beginning, it's nice when you need props, be it music or some kind of a special light or incense, whatever. But at some point we have to let go of these crutches, because those crutches will actually stop us from going beyond, right?
Right.
So from that perspective, I keep, thinking, is this really right?
Well, it's just like what I said, if it becomes an obstacle, then it's a problem. And so I think, I believe it was Swami Rama who said that the 2 wings of freedom are, practice and non-attachment. And so as easily as we can take the music, we should be able to turn the music off and still do our practice or still do our meditation and not feel like we need to have those things in order to achieve some goal.
When we think about kind of the modern human person, there is a sense of innate restlessness. There is a sense of the agitation of the nervous system. There's a sense of all the pressure that we are under. And how do we purify that? And both Hatha and Tantra are practices of purification. They just have different methodologies. And yes, the world that we live in today, there's a lot of crossover. In most classes or teachings, it's sort of the yoga mashup. Do we then rely on music as the crutch? Maybe for some people, yes. But we also know from modern neuroscience that music can change your state of mind. And if you take somebody who has that distracted, nervous system agitated, living in the postmodern body, maybe it takes more than one thing. Maybe there is a value to the yoga mashup because we are in the complexities and the paradox of the 21st century.
Here's the one thing I'm going to say about renunciation. I don't know if you want to take this or not. Renunciation should be your choice because you find it more, it's calling you more than indulgence. It's calling you so strongly that indulgence pales in front of it. That the act of sex becomes so minor compared to the joy of virya that you get from brahmachari. That's when you should renounce, not before that. That's enforced renouncement. I don't want to enforce renunciation on anybody. You should know why you're renouncing. You're renunciating because you're seeking a joy that makes this joy seem like nothing.
And that's a tricky thing to do. Renunciation is tricky, integration is tricky, right? But all of those, whether it is Hatha Yoga or Tantra, all of those offer that sense of how do we go through an experience that leads us to liberation, right? Because ultimately, when we think about the owner's manual to the human body, the human mind, the human heart, the human spirit, it is all about freedom. We exist to experience freedom. We exist, that is our experience, to feel that, to embody that, right? And everything we do along the way is to get us there.
Starts with you. It starts with the person who's teaching, or it starts with the studio owner, and that at some level that person has to commit themselves to self-mastery, because there's no way that you can lead another person to mastery unless you are dedicated to that yourself. And so I think for me it's more about education, and that's really where it's going to start.
Yoga community should focus on giving it the conceptual clarity about yoga, what yoga means. Those who are publishing yoga journals, those who are conducting seminars and courses on yoga, they should not simply stop at the level of a asana. they should also give this knowledge to people that beyond asana, there are 5 other steps.
Do you think that a yoga entrepreneur or a yoga businessman should have strong morals and disciplines to be successful or sustainable, let's say that?
I mean, I think that question is just so basic. What you're asking me is, do I believe that a life of yoga is going to create freedom and abundance? And the answer is 100% yes. If you're practicing yoga, and I don't mean asana, then this is it. It's not whether you do or whether you don't, you do. Because these principles bring more freedom. It's a given. So, would a yoga entrepreneur do well to follow those precepts? Yeah. I mean, can you imagine? Yes, I'm a yoga entrepreneur. I teach asana. Nonviolence is essential. And by the way, I'm going to treat my employees in a way that's harmful. Right? I mean, how do you even, right?
We know that the purpose of an industry is to propitiate wealth. So if we want to bring the yama niyama paradigm into the industry, we have to market it. We have to make it something that people want. So that's interesting because we've never had to actually think in terms of yamas and niyamas as being marketed as something people would want. How are we going to do that? One of the ways we will do that is if we're able to make people understand that what they're really seeking, they actually will find if they go down that path.
Now that yoga teaching has become a business, a big business, that has kept the studios alive, it's important that all of those teachers that burst from the LA scene to their small towns across the country and world, that they take with them a very strong grounding in yama, niyama, pranayama, pratyahara, and when they're ready, the dharana, dhyana, because I think that it's the point of it all. Otherwise, it's just one more self-involvement of let me, sweat in a hot power yoga so I can get into my size 4 jeans.
It continues to suffuse through American realities. I think that it's also important for there to be people professionally trained in yoga, that is, that actually are familiar with the language, with the Sanskrit language, that are familiar with the history and the philosophy, and are well equipped to understand both psyches, the psyche of the Indian yogic system that highly values nonviolence and peacefulness and truthfulness, not in like don't tell lies sense, but in the sense of having sat, a sense of having a place of prominence and gravitas within the world, and to be able to interface and understand the needs of the American psyche, which tends to be a little bit rootless, tends to be quite mobile. Americans are always seeking, how can we find our way in the world? We're actually a little bit self-obsessed. And what the Indian model says is that, well, to find your true self, to find, as Joseph Campbell said, to find your bliss, we need to slow down. We need to breathe. We need to be able to stretch. We need to be able to settle in. And yoga, in the way it's being developed and the way it's being very creatively engaged in so many different paths, is providing the structures for that.
And people need to find that inspired authority inside of themselves, and they need to become their own teacher. That's why I feel like intuition is really important, because how do you hear your soul? How do you hear it? How do you hear the messages? If you start meditating and opening up your intuitive faculties, the higher centers as they're open, the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, the 10th gate, you start being able to connect and you hear very subtly where you're supposed to go. And it could be you're just driving down the street and all of a sudden you look and you see a 7-Eleven, you think, I'm gonna go buy a paper suddenly. Your intuition says, drive in there. And you go drive in there and you walk in and then there's a guy that you knew from college and he's totally the person that is gonna take you to the next development of your own purpose here on the earth. I really believe every person has a purpose.
Healthy means is not only a physical phenomenon. Health is not a physical trait only. Health is a mental, physical, vital, and also a spiritual concept.
I find that really exciting. We have a great future ahead, but we definitely have foundational, fundamental work to do in the educational side. And if we do that, there's over 20 million people out there wanting to come into yoga studios. They want a place to go to meditate.
And the responsibility of the teacher comes from two places: their own practice, and then the support they receive from their studio, their mentor, their own teacher, and so on. Right? So there is a way that in the yoga community we are all connected. That myself as a teacher, I am connected through my own teacher, through my own practice, and through the support of where I teach. And then it is my responsibility to pass that on to my students.
Well, I just want to say, my view is that the baseline came from my teacher, Krishnamacharya, who said, yoga is not commercial activity. It's like a resounding, important message that I think when people take that message on sincerely, they understand, why do I do yoga and why do I teach yoga? It's for love. It's for love of life.
The way we live in relationship with our planet, the way we don't take more than we need. I think living lives that are exemplary in yogic ways is always the best thing. If we haven't let yoga transform us, how can we inspire other people to be transformed?
Yeah.
You have to live the yoga.
What each one of us, I think, must do is always, as much as possible, always find and act from the deepest place in our heart. And also understand that we barely know what's right for ourselves, so we can't say that we know what's right for others. But if we're always trying to touch that deeper place and express from that place, then that gives permission, sort of, and freedom for all of us to act in that way and to think in that way. And it's, I guess that's Sangha, community of beings, satsang, human beings, who are trying to explore the deeper parts of themselves. And when I see you doing it, it gives me courage to do it. And when this person sees us doing it, it gives them courage to do it.
As we clear our subconscious, as we clear those thoughts, as we clear maybe the self-destructive habits that we've gotten into, will lift. More prosperity comes to people, they get happier, and then they make other people happier. And the biggest thing that you can do for people is just be happy. Make yourself happy and other people feel happy too by being around you.
I think we need more actionable or applied yoga education now. A lot of books have been written and a lot of movies have been made about the history of yoga and the benefits of a yoga practice. Now it is time we educate people about the practical aspects of manifesting these yoga philosophies. And this kind of education may be more practical guides to how to start the path, how to choose a teacher, or some of the obstacles we'll face on this path. I agree that it is important to educate people in a way that is engaging, which may result in more teachers incorporating music and dances and other art forms in yoga classes. I'm okay with this kind of mashup as long as one does not lose track of the purpose of yoga and the seriousness of having a strong spiritual practice. As an example, if yoga teachers are spending more time in compiling playlists for their classes instead of spending time in finding out how they can integrate asana, pranayama and meditation into their classes, that is a clear warning sign that we are not on the right path. Maybe that's the time we stop and reconsider what is the purpose of yoga and why are we teaching yoga today. Finally, I would like to end this documentary by emphasizing on the importance of self-inquiry. Self-inquiry is one of the founding pillars of the yogic philosophy. This simple act of exploring our true nature and the result of our actions can transform our lives in many ways, giving a lot more clarity about ourselves and life in general. So a short self-inquiry process of maybe even 5 to 10 minutes in a yoga class or outside a yoga class can make a lot of difference in our lives. I hope you leave this movie with a little more clarity about yoga and a little more inspiration to deepen your practice. I wish you much success on your spiritual journey. Namaste.